Good afternoon and welcome to a very special edition of our Community Conversations series here at Western Michigan University Cooley Law School. Today we come to you from the 5th floor appellate courtroom at the Cooley Center. I'm Paul Zielinski, Senior Vice President and Associate Dean of the Law School, and have the privilege of getting this conversation started. At the heart of gold, inside the USA Gymnastics Scandal, is an HBO documentary produced and written by Dr. Stephen Underleiter. The documentary is the impetus for today's discussion. Our hope leading into this event is that you have the opportunity to view this impactful, important, and emotional film. We are pleased today to have three guests to guide us through our conversation about the cases against Dr. Larry Nassar, former U.S. Gymnastics and Michigan State doctor, and the U.S. Olympic Committee and USA Gymnastics. First, I am honored and pleased to introduce Ms. Trinae Gonzer, a gymnast from Lansing and a survivor of Larry Nassar, and featured prominently in the documentary. She's an advocate for preventing sexual assault and helping other victims. She is currently the director of development of the Wayne County Sexual Assault Forensic Examiners Program in the city of Detroit, where she lives with her husband and son. Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Mick Grewal, Sr., founding and managing partner of the Graywall Law Firm. I'm proud to say he's a WMU Cooley alum, having graduated in 1993. Mick and his team represented 111 of the 333 survivors in the lawsuit against Michigan State involving the former MSU doctor Larry Nassar. He and his firm are also representing 139 survivors against USA Gymnastics and the U.S. Olympic Committee. And lastly, I'd like to introduce the Honorable Rosemarie Aquilina, Ingham County Circuit Court Judge, and also an alum of WMU Cooley Law School. Judge Aquilina presided over the cases against Larry Nassar in Ingham County. Each of our guests today were featured in the documentary and are here to talk about the experience and to have a conversation about the Larry Nassar cases specifically and sexual assault awareness and prevention more broadly. We hope today's program will quickly open into a discussion. So those of you at home, please ask questions along the way by raising your virtual hand or putting them in the chat. We are recording today's program, but let's get the conversation started with Judge Aquilina. Judge Aquilina, Dr. Underleiter, the producer and writer of the documentary, made a very small but profound statement, and he said, quote, "We still have a lot of work to do." What's your reaction to that statement?
You got it right, absolutely. Saying you've learned something means something has changed, and we are still waiting for a meaningful change. And I believe that necessity is the mother of fearlessness, and it took these brave sister survivors everything they had to tell their truth, to protect others, and to finally be heard. But what has really changed? More and more victims have come forward. They're still met with the same silence and roadblocks that these brave sister survivors have had. And I want to turn this over to Trinae Gonzer, who has worked fearlessly to make changes, and she knows some of the changes that have been in place, but I think she would agree with me that we are far from seeing what needs to be done to protect everyone. Trinae?
Yes, you know, in the side of hope, I really would like to stay in the side that there is hope for change, but unfortunately change can take a long time. And as we are seeing with the other cases that are happening in our state, we're far from change, and we have a very long way to go, and we have a lot of big changes to come. So, you know, I'm going to stay in the hope side of things, but I definitely recognize that it might not be in my lifetime that we'll get to where I'd like us to be, but we're paving the way.
You know, maybe one of the obvious questions on the onset here today is just give us a little bit of the background of how this documentary came about. How did you get approached? Just a little bit about the process, so that before we get into some of the meat of what we discovered through the documentary, some of us who weren't intimately involved with, you know, the instant in and outs of the cases. How did this all happen?
I can start with myself. I think I was one of the first approached. They were actually filming in the impact statements. They were attending that, so they had kind of an idea of some of the stories that they would like to follow and kind of approached us, very politely. But there was some research that we did behind the scenes trying to figure out exactly who they were, because at that time everybody wanted to talk to us and everybody wanted a piece of us. So we were really specific about what their storyline was, what the parameters were, but also really excited that the conversation was going to be continued and that they were really going to do justice to what the institutional failures and those enablers behind doors who were really actually facilitating the abuse.
How much influence did you have over the content? Or is it all Dr. Stephen Underlatter who kind of pulled it together?
Well, I can address the fact that they actually approached my office to ask if they could speak to a number of survivors, and we were in the course of litigation, and I talked to people such as Trinae that were already vocal out there, and I asked if they were interested in speaking to them, and they actually were very kind, trauma-informed when they talked to each survivor, and they listened to them and allowed them to have input in how the story was told.
And I had been approached by everyone in the world and said no to 99.9% of the things that people wanted me to do. And this was a project that when I was approached, I thought was meaningful. I liked the idea behind it. I had talked to some of the sister survivors to make sure it was okay with them. And what I liked was the vision of Dr. Ungerleider and the producers, Aaron Carr and Sarah Gibson, who really wanted to do this to educate. It wasn't about dollars. It wasn't about retribution. It wasn't about so many other things that could be sensationalized. Mm-hmm. This was about to get the real story out, to educate, to change, and to really allow the sister survivors a platform to go around the world and say, this is what happened to us. Let's change the world together. And I think really that has united not just these sister survivors, but they've united with other survivors. And that's what we need to do, is partner with men and women who want change. And this has been a wonderful platform to be involved with, and great people to be involved with this mission for meaningful change for everybody.
Right. Judge, to your point, those viewers that weren't in the room just previous to the program, we had some of our students come up to you to thank you and the rest of the team and the impact that it made. Have you seen, after the documentary initially aired, did you see any kind of popularity or increased awareness within your respective positions? Trinae, you work with Wayne County.
We actually did just have a name change. We're at the Avalon Healing Center now, which we were formerly Wayne County SAFE, which was Sexual Assault Forensics Examiners, and we actually just recently did that because we aren't only in Wayne County, and we don't just do the Sexual Assault Forensics Examiners any longer. We do those pieces, but we're a healing center for survivors of sexual assault, and I kind of fell upon that accidentally as I started searching for support for survivors in our case, particularly one that had attempted suicide the same day that I did my impact statement. And she was put in the hospital, and she's offered that I can share her story, but she was put in the hospital and then attempted suicide again a week later. And I just kept thinking that everywhere she's going is not the right place for her. They're not trauma informed. They aren't speaking sexual assault. They aren't supporting her. If anything, she's getting re-traumatized by going into these mental health facilities. So I started looking for places that support survivors of sexual assault. And by chance, we have one in Detroit that's been operating for 17 years, and that do support survivors in any way, completely free, comprehensive, which, as I've started to begin this work, I've gone through my own healing journey, and I will say I am no longer with my hair in a ponytail. I'm not pregnant anymore. But for a second, when the documentary was out, I was recognized a lot. And going to Meyer was really difficult for me. And I would be, it was hard for me to be hard for somebody else to see who I was, because it was often men. And they would ask if they could hug me. And I was okay to do that, but they would have tears in their eyes, like the size of crocodiles, of just seeing my face. And so I started to realize I was the trigger. for some. I mean, I know that I had given hope to some, but I was also a trigger for some. And so I went blonde and didn't wear my hair up anymore for a second. And now it's, you know, it's years past, and now I'm in a completely different space in my life. But back then it was a little bit more difficult than
Yeah.
I expected it to be.
Anybody else experience any different way of living your life as a result of the documentary?
I have found that the documentary, along with the courage of all the sister survivors and what Judge Aquilina allowed them to do, all speak, as well as Judge Cunningham, it created a new narrative in society to allow victim survivors to come forward and get away from the shame and blame. So I've actually seen more and more people come forward openly to talk about their experiences and not having that luggage on their back, that they're the ones that blame the shame. So, I always tell everybody, believe what you hear. I mean, to be quite frank, survivors don't want to be in the position they're in.
Right.
They're not going to sit there and make up the story.
Mick, for the future lawyers that are watching today, how did you get picked to represent so many of the survivors? How did that go down?
I like to think that it's because I believed early on. It's just maybe part of my character, and I'm easy to talk to, and I have a lot of empathy. I mean, becoming an attorney, you're an advocate, and you're taught whether it's a criminal defense attorney or you're going to do a personal injury case, you're there to advocate on behalf of your client.
Right.
So when these survivors came forward, at least in my office, I mean, originally I still remember it was December of 2016 when the two people contacted our office. Everybody else said, there's no way that you're going to be able to do anything. A lot of these people are making it up, et cetera, et cetera. They're after money. And I just said, you know what? We're here to listen, and we're going to believe. And I was going out of state. By the time I got back, 2 became 4, 4 became 20, 20 eventually became 111.
Yeah. Did proximity play a role in this, do you think, too, or no?
Yes and no. I mean, I have clients throughout the whole country, even some out of the country, that were part of the case.
Sure.
I'm going back in your original question that you asked about change, that both the judge and Trinae said change is slow. Prior to coming here today, we were at a legislative hearing trying to create change again to give other survivors a voice. So we can hope it's going to be in our lifetime. I sure hope it's going to be in our lifetime for my kids and everybody else that's out there listening, for your kids' sake. I mean, everybody deserves justice. We want transparency, and we want accountability. It takes time, but you have to fight.
Building off a little bit about what does meaningful change look like to each one of you in the area of sexual assault and sexual assault awareness and survivor advocacy and those kind of things? What does that look like to you in your mind, having spent so much time in this area? Judge, do you want to take a stab at that?
I think first and foremost, there needs to be information given at every level, whether it is someone, a child, when they learn the word no. They need to be taught that their body, they have a right to say no, and they need to be told what informed consent is, and good touches and bad touches and all of that. We have a lot of education to do. And then we need to look at prosecutors, for example. We basically now have a system failure that continues. If law enforcement investigates, every single time someone's touched, that information should be turned over to prosecutors. Prosecutors need to, if there's the elements, they need to not be the judge and jury. What they need to do is simply put it on a felony complaint or misdemeanor complaint, however it goes, and turn it over. I think we have a system failure when we're not listening to anyone who complains about any kind of crime and turning them over to the right people for the investigation to be proper and then for it to go forward. When we minimize, for example, Trinae, can I use you as an example?
Go right ahead.
Trinae was assaulted, I don't know, approximately 850 times. There's one charge. Why is that? That does not listen truly to her voice, and it does not send a message to criminals out there who may be doing the same thing and to say, geez, I better stop, I better get help. And it really empowers the predator and it diminishes the victim. There is work to be done at every single level. How doctors approach victims when they are assaulted, when they're pregnant. And again, Trinae can talk about this, and so many women have reached out to me saying, I can't see a female doctor. I was in labor and I had to have everybody leave the room. And I've told them this is not a unique experience, and we need to retrain the medical community, because when someone has been sexually assaulted, or sometimes assaulted in other ways, they don't want their bodies to be investigated by all sorts of doctors, even through pregnancy. And so there's so many changes that we need in order to tell victims they've been heard, they matter, and these changes will occur. Something else that's fundamental is that there's no time limit on healing. I think we've learned that, but why do we have to say, just because a victim has complained, well, that they should be healing now? It's a lifetime of healing. And again, people are not trauma informed on those very basics. They figure, well, because they got money, they're healed. Mm-hmm. There's not one of those sister survivors. And again, Trinae, this is her story, but I know from what I've heard and from what I've seen in other countless cases, there is no putting someone behind bars, no amount of money that will make any victim say, well, I'm glad I went through that. None of them. They would all say, I would erase all of this, give back every penny, every headline, if this never would have happened. I mean, the work that we have to do, the changes that have to be made, are deep and far and wide.
Thank you, Judge. Trinae, do you have a similar take, or do you have something else that you'd also want to say about
the education piece is extremely important, and it does need to start from a very young age. And I think, schools and parents, being a parent of a 1 and a 3-year-old, I recognize the fear of other people educating their children, specifically on topics like sexual assault, but I think best way to prevent them is to get them to practice certain verbiage to make them understand that the safe people that they have, and that certain behaviors aren't, they don't have to sustain, they do not have to be in situations that do make them feel uncomfortable. So explaining to them even what uncomfort feels like, and talking to them about the safe persons that they can report to. Yeah. But I really also think rape culture is such an important topic to be talked about, because, boys will not be boys, and that kind of phrase is so detrimental to us going forward, because they're used so commonly. And, it's changing my boys' way of speaking to their buddies as they grow, and also changing, the way of my sisters, of their raising their children. So if we don't talk about the rape culture piece and understand what rape culture is, and educate on the pieces that we need to be teaching the children, we're going to repeat history.
If my memory serves me correctly, I think it was you in the documentary that made a comment about that the predators don't run around in white vans always. It's people that, and the point is made with Nassar is that he was, a good person. He was the, kind of the go-to, whether it be the Crowley Ranch or, at MSU or whatever. Expound on that a little bit about kind of what a predator may look like.
Yeah. It's hard. Predators are typically serial, first and foremost. So when a survivor has an experience happening to them and they say, I think it's just me. A lot of the things that we're going through right now is encouraging survivors to report, because the more that they can report on one person, the more community they have, but also validity they have to that person. Like with the Anderson case right now, I mean, he wasn't as nice guy, where Larry and my husband yells at me every time I say it, but I really loved him. He was a very good friend of mine, and it took a lot out of my soul and my heart to have to realize that he was not the person what I expected of the white van driving down the street, or what we all anticipate as so obviously a perpetrator. It's so completely opposite of that. It's somebody that works very hard to get close to your family, or to make you think that, to do everything they can to disguise their perpetrator behavior. So, Larry was a textbook example of that.
Can I just say,
sure,
I think the film brings out something that I think we've all answered questions on, many, many times, and it's brought to light that people do not know what grooming and gaslighting are. And grooming is the systematic pattern of manipulation that allows an abuser to gain access to a potential victim. And they coerce the victim into doing things that they might not ordinarily do, but they've built this trust relationship. And as you can see with many of the sister survivors, and I think probably with Anderson and with many, many victims, is that they don't only groom the victim. Oftentimes they groom the family and other people, so they think that all of this is normal. And what's abnormal, they're groomed to believe is normal. And then when they question it, that's gaslighting. And that's a systematic pattern where the abuser manipulates facts, making the victim feel that what they know intuitively is right is wrong. And again, that's part of the education, but I think this film does it so beautifully to explain how that happened and how Trinae can say, and I loved him. He did all of these things, and her mother loved him. And that was true of many of the parents. Many of the parents feel horribly guilty that somehow they were complacent in this. They didn't question when they should have. It's not their fault. It's not any of the sister survivors' fault. That's the grooming and the gaslighting that was done so cleverly over a long period of time. Those are the signs we need to learn to recognize, not just for ourselves, but for others, so that we can report, so that we can ask questions.
Sure. You know, those of you who may not have had an opportunity to see the documentary yet, and if you can't see the whole thing, I would ask you, I think it's toward very near the end of the documentary when you appear and to give your statement. I had to pause for a minute just to kind of collect and then go back. And it's a very powerful moment. How did you have the courage? What got you there to get to that point where you could look Nassar in the eye? You were family friends, is my understanding?
Well, yeah, he was I was a gymnast with him well before he was a doctor. He was our trainer.
Okay.
And then he went into med school, which his wife had actually replaced him before she was his wife. And so, yeah, I was at his wedding. I watched Kyle Stevens, the little neighbor girl. I mean, I knew her. Looking back, I was with her all the time, seeing her there. So it was not a good moment in my life having to do that. And I did write from my heart to him what I really truly wanted to say. And I really only decided to go public that day, probably about 2 hours before.
Is that right?
I was Jane Doe B43 until about that point. And the reason that I decided to go public was that I was watching the Olympians and some of the girls that were speaking, and they were significantly younger than I. And I knew that the group that I was with, my older teammates, were the ones that were probably significantly abused, like as an amount of times, because we were with him so often, 5 days a week, throughout, where the others had been maybe Monday nights. So I went in, I was actually terrified of Judge Aquilina, so I started stumbling my words at first, but she was so gracious and helped me kind of just talk me through getting through that. But then turning to him is when it all changed, because I knew going into that courtroom, the way that he was responding to the others and how he was behaving was not the person that I knew, and that if he did not react to me in any way, shape, or form, that he was already gone, that he was a dead person, and that's not how it went.
Mm-hmm.
So.
No, he did. Those of you who aren't familiar, we mentioned a couple of times the Anderson case. That's the University of Michigan case. The doctor, I don't think he was employed by the university, but it's an active case right now. Many of them are male survivors that are coming forward, athletes and others, graduate students that's working their way through the court system now. Mick, we have a question from one of our viewers that how did you change as a result of representing the victims, survivors?
It does take a lot out of me, emotionally and physically. I mean, you listen to the trauma of hundreds, in the Nassar case, hundreds of women, young women, and what they endured. And you think back in your own life. In this particular circumstance, my oldest daughter actually was in gymnastics at Red Cedar Gymnastics, and it could have been me. in those shoes sitting there. So, I mean, there's a weight on you, but at the same time, I think I'm helping make the change that we're all talking about. And by doing that, making society a better place, not only for my children, but for everybody in general. I'd just like to go back 1 minute.
Sure, absolutely.
Just to talk about the grooming and the issues around grooming. You need to understand that grooming, this nice guy pedophile predator, could be your neighbor, could be your uncle, could be your aunt. I mean, we don't know. And this is why education is so important. Not just at the young age, which we're all talking about, but even right now, through the documentary, through all the people listening at this could be anybody next door, and you have to have your guard up. Because if you don't, bad things happen. And I'll go back to the Anderson case, because I'm actually co-lead counsel in that case. We represent 250 of 1,000 men and women. That's another doctor. It's a doctor that wasn't nice, but they were told by the institution that they had to go see him. Just like in the Nassar case, they had to go see Larry. So when these institutions enable predators and allow them to assault our brothers, sisters, or sons and daughters, we need change at the institution level.
That's a great segue, because I wanted to go there for a minute. We have some questions coming in, which is great. Keep them coming, we'll get to them, I'm sure. Coaches, administrators, police officers, the system clearly let the survivors down in this process. How do we systemically address that?
Accountability. Where's the accountability? The FBI did what? They fired 2 people? That's window dressing. It needs to start from the inside of the organization out. Michigan State, U of M, every medical school. We all need to retrain. There has to be accountability, and the legal system needs to catch up. Legislators, where are you? What about co-conspirators? Anyone in my book who watches a crime, knows about a crime, is a bystander, an enabler, becomes a co-conspirator. We do have, if you rob a bank, even though you're in the getaway car, but you rob the bank physically inside, your person who's driving the getaway car, they're charged equally. Why is that not happening here? If that happened, this would get cleaned up a lot sooner. If papers were mandated to be turned over, we would know who was licensed, mandatory reporters, and I think there are thousands of them out there complicit in all of this, in the Anderson case, in the Nassar case, and so many cases out there, who had an obligation, a duty, licensed, mandated reporters who failed to report. And you know what? We will never know, because those people who are afraid are locking down and destroying evidence and not turning it over. If they had the evidence, Mick could review it. Trinae could review it. We could look and see what went wrong. Who is further responsible? Is there retraining needed? It's a systemic problem until there's actual accountability. And I have a question, especially to the legislators. Where are you? Why haven't we had this discussion? Why is it taking so long? There's a change in a statute here, a new law there, but not enough. Where's the accountability? If we need to mandate it legislatively, let's get to it.
They're putting brand ahead of people.
Yes.
Special interest groups ahead of people. I mean, let's be completely candid. We know sexual assault is a systematic problem across the country. You have clergy abuse. You have abuse with regard to the Weinstein, Cosby case, the Kelly case, Nassar, Anderson, USC, Tyndall, UCLA, Penn State. It's systematic. We need accountability, just like the judge said. The laws need to be changed. And she's 100% right. If you knew that you were going to be charged criminally, you would turn that information over. Can you believe right now it's been 5 years since we were dealing with the Michigan State Nassar case, and they still won't turn over 6,000 pages of documents. A public university won't turn it over because they're saying attorney-client privilege. Come on. There's no criminal charges are going to come. Turn it over so we can get to the bottom of this.
Utah just passed legislation, thankfully, that makes it a misdemeanor to not report. But that's not enough. It's not far enough. It's what they could get, and I applaud them for doing that. And I'm hoping the other 50 states and internationally they do that. But we have so much farther to go.
You know, one of the things that struck me in the documentary is the role that parents played, you know, and they were aligned with Larry for a good portion of the process. And one of the things that, as I was preparing for this, is that I think, again, it was your comment, Trinae, about how to be a good ally. And I think your response was, listen.
Well, I was, unfortunately, I was a person that actually silenced several of the survivors back in the day, mostly because I didn't understand and I thought that the treatment had been done to me so many times that this is just what we're doing and we're all good, it's been done to me. But for the parents, you know, my mom spoke she did her impact statement, and she will forever carry a weight of guilt of feeling like she was almost an ally to him, or that she had no way to intervene because she wasn't aware, and he was really good at grooming her to make her not understand what was happening because she was in the room. But listening and also noticing, you know, in athletes particularly or children specifically, when behavior changes, when all of a sudden something they love, they don't love anymore, you know, ask why their coach is having a little bit more attention to them and wondering why they have special candies coming home. And I hate saying things like that because I never want somebody that is doing good intentions of simply just saying, like, you did a great job today, here's a Skittle. But in my case, I got red Skittles to stop me from crying a lot of times. So there's, you know, association of behavior as well as listening.
And the parents are not to be blamed. Again, they were groomed, and Trinae always raises that she, you know, her guilt. And Trinae, you are wonderful for recognizing that, but you know it's not your fault. You were groomed. Everybody was groomed. And that's the thing about the predator. A predator can be anybody, but we have to also look for the signs. And one of the signs, whether it's a school or within an athletic department or gymnastics, whatever it is, anywhere a parent cannot be where a child is, that's a huge red flag. Huge red flag. And there's so many of those red flags, and that's where this education piece needs to be in every classroom, in every household. And it's not there yet. We haven't even scratched the surface.
We have a couple questions coming in from our audience, and we want to encourage you to have them keep coming in. This is a question for you, Judge. You stated that the system needs to be changed. If that change is going to take place, it has to come from within, especially in the judicial system. Are there any changes taking place now in the judicial system? You alluded to some of this a little bit already, Utah, that is helpful and different today than it was when you first took on these cases?
Not really. I've always, what you saw me do in the Nassar case, I've always done. I've always listened to victims, Crime Has No Borders. And so I've let everybody speak, and I've always spoken to them, to leave them, to use the power of the robe as something that they take with them. It's not evil, but really a good thing, right? And so many people think, oh, you're the judge, you're big, bad, and mean. Well, that's not how I see our judicial system. We need to have judicial training from judges school on, even in the law schools, to train about how to deal with victims. Things like, I don't ask why. I think why shames and blames and needs to be retired into science. That's where it belongs. There's still a lot of judges that say, well, why were you there? Why were you alone at night? Why were you wearing that? Why didn't you tell someone? And that why shames, blames, and instantly shuts down victims. That's why I always ask, what would you like me to know? I can tell you, the New York chief of police said, you must come to our training. And I attended training for about 900 police officers and detectives, etc. And they wanted to hear from me, where did we go wrong? What can we learn? How can we get better information? I've gone to a couple of different trainings in Texas and to other states to talk to judges about what can they do better. But have I seen systematic changes within the judiciary? No. Does there need to be some? Absolutely. In fact, in some cases, I've seen the opposite. I've had a few judges approach me and say, Aquilina, it's because of you. Now we have to listen to everybody. because they want to be on the golf course, or they want to go home, or they want to take a nap, or do whatever. Well, then get a different job, go pour coffee, and then go out to the golf course. As judges, this is our role. We are the voice and ears and eyes of the people who elected us. Do your job or get out.
Mick, we're sitting in a law school that we all love and care about. Take us inside the initial intakes. You know, someone comes to your office that may be a survivor or in the midst of a situation. What advice do you have out there for our students and others that might want to get into this area of work?
Become trauma informed. Because of this case and my ability and my office's ability to listen to survivors, I actually had Trinae's organization come train every single one of my employees to be trauma informed. Because if you're not trauma informed, you're not going to know what words to ask. Like the judge said, if you ask why, we're re-traumatizing them.
Yeah.
So you really have to become trauma informed. And listen, many of the survivors that came forward that I spoke to actually didn't speak to me first. They spoke to women attorneys and women members of my office. And I had to be cognizant of that fact, that it's okay to let them build trust again. Because that's what it is, it's building trust. And eventually, I spoke to all of them, but eventually they understand that they can trust a man again. But as we said, many people don't want to go to a male doctor. But even in the Anderson case, people don't even want to go to a doctor, period.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are getting cancer.
And think about this, every 68 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. So while we've been here, I haven't done the math, I don't really even know how long we've been here, but probably 100 people have been assaulted right now.
You know, I'm really curious about the trauma awareness. Can you take us inside that? What is that? You know, I don't want you to give us the whole session here today, but give people a sense of what that training might be like. Training, you want to take a shot at that?
Speak to the expert.
Yes, yeah. Trauma-informed care is actually an approach, really, that and it's something that you can be taught. It's being really intentional to not re-traumatize the victim.
Gotcha.
So as you're asking questions, you're not repeating questions. You're not having to have them repeat their story over and over again. You're not asking the whys. You're being really intentional about listening, but also helping them navigate without traumatizing them. Is telling their story over and over again. And also, you know, like the judge had mentioned, there's a lot of science in how you remember an assault and what you remember. Because, and the reactions of the survivor. In laughing, you know, laughing can be a nervous reaction to trauma. So even in a car accident, somebody's in a car accident and they're laughing, that doesn't mean that they didn't just have a car accident. It just means that's how their body is actually responding to that trauma. And it's the same thing in sexual assault. Particularly with sexual assault, you're usually not prepared to be sexually assaulted. You didn't walk in thinking like, I'm gonna be assaulted today and I'm prepared for that. So your body just naturally responds how it's going to. And you know, what we're aiming to do is making sure all law offices that might deal with survivors of sexual assault are Avalon certified in trauma-informed care, so that we can know that anybody that's needing help from a legal standpoint, the people that we're handing them to are not going to re-trigger them or re-traumatize them. Same thing with the judges, same things with first responders, same things with doctors in the hospital. Pretty much anybody that can touch or is on a first line of somebody with sexual assault, we want to make sure they're trauma-informed.
And if they're assaulted, you have to understand, it's not the first time they talk to you. I've talked to clients like 12 times before they open up. Because you do listen. You sit there and listen and tell their story on their time frame. And it takes a lot of time for them to feel comfortable with you, to share the most intimate, horrifying event that happened to them.
And something else is that when someone is attacked, brutalized in whatever way, your body is really smart. Your brain is saying, let me survive. I'm going to survive. I'm going to survive. You are not thinking about, oh, I'm being raped. So sometimes that's repressed because the first thing is, I want to live. I want to live. And it's a very human reaction, and our bodies are built that way. So just because a rape victim does not immediately disclose. They might not even remember it until much later because of the trauma to their body and the fact that your body is saying, let me live, I want to live. And then later it comes into play. And I have seen defense counsel just berate victims because they didn't report immediately, because they're just remembering in the last few months, because. But that is so very natural and part of the trauma. And that's part of all of us being informed of what happens, how to respond, how to ask open-ended questions and let them feel safe and tell the story and heal in their own time.
We have another question that came in, and judges, for you, we'll stick with you for a second. How do you maintain your professional composure in a professional courtroom in situations that have such high emotions at play?
Well, first and foremost, everyone deserves an impartial judge, a fair and impartial process. And if you went to the emergency room and your arm was hanging off because you trimmed your trees wrong and you got your own arm, and you went and saw a doctor who started crying, would you want that doctor to sew on, reattach your arm? And the answer is no. So I don't get emotional in my courtroom, generally, even in the most trying and difficult of cases, because that is not my role. And I will only serve those people in front of me, both victim, prosecutor, defense counsel, whoever's in front of me and defendant, if I can maintain my composure and use what I know about the law, what I learned in school, what I've learned as a judge. I am ineffective and not being fair and impartial to both sides if I am emotional. Now, have I gotten emotional in my courtroom? Sure. But do I let it interfere in my ability to perform my duties? Yes. And overall, I try at all times to maintain a composure regardless of what's in front of me and what we're talking about. And that's justice, I think.
Right, and this is identified in the documentary as well. Can you walk us through the sentencing process for you internally? I mean, the statement that Nassar wrote seemed to pivot for you. I don't know if I'm reading this correctly.
Yes.
So can you just walk us through kind of how that went?
So the sentencing, I didn't know how many people were going to testify, and what happened was the courage of one sister survivor gave the courage to another and another, and you just heard Trinae describe that she wasn't going to do it, and eventually she did because that courage just ignited more and more courage. So I didn't know how many people were going to testify. When I walked in to the sentencing, I was even shocked. I'd never had that many people in my courtroom ever. And I listened, and repeatedly, if you go back and watch the videos of the trial, which I have not, but I remember it very clearly, many of the sister survivors said, look at me when I speak, look at me, because he was doing everything he could do to avoid them and to just sort of pretend he wasn't there, and he was laughing with his lawyers and writing things down and just totally inappropriate behavior, and I tried to tolerate what I could. Then he wrote me that 6-page letter that basically said, and I'm innocent, and I did nothing wrong, and this was medical. And so I read in those portions into the record because for me, a couple of things were important. First of all, both attorneys, prosecutor and defense counsel, said when I was talking to them in chambers about this, saying I'm going to read it, well, and I said, I need to ask if he's going to withdraw his plea. And they both begged me, don't do that. Well, I'm obligated. I don't align myself with either side. I'm obligated. If he's really having a mental breakdown, if he is mentally ill, if he pled and he was not in his right frame of mind, I need to send him to forensics. I need to address that. Otherwise, it's totally appealable as his rights are being trampled on. When I read that letter, I needed everybody to know where his mindset was and to make a record of it for the appellate courts and for everybody, because my sentencing was also going to include that. And then I asked him, would you like to withdraw your plea? And it was hard for him, or he made it seem hard. It was all a show. I didn't believe one tear. I didn't believe one crack in his voice, except that it went to him, how he was feeling. He didn't have 1 ounce of empathy. It was very clear in the courtroom. And when I asked him, he said, no, he didn't want to. And I said, again, because you are guilty. Because I wanted to firm it up, because that letter and his whole mindset during sentencing was, I didn't do anything wrong. You're attacking me for the wrong reasons. I did everything right. I didn't even charge these people. I didn't do this and that. I gave my schedule and myself. Well, what he did was systematically abuse them, groom them, and gaslighted them and their families and the community and the Olympics and so many things, and never has yet owned it. I'm hoping now in prison that he has reconsidered, that he's getting rehabilitated. I don't think anybody wishes him harm. I think everybody, myself included, wishes that he realizes what he does, recognizes it, and starts to heal behind bars. Sometimes you have to heal behind bars because you cannot be in the community. And that's what my sentencing spoke to.
I might have this wrong, but Gedart and Claggis were held accountable, whether we agree there was appropriate accountability or not, is my understanding. The Crowleys over in wherever their camp is that still in play or is that done?
So Gedart was charged and he committed suicide.
Right.
Coach Kathy Clagis, she was charged for lying to the police. She was convicted. She was sentenced to something.
I think it was a year.
Yeah, but I think she got 60 days in jail.
Right, she didn't serve all of it.
She got probation early because of COVID. So whether or not you want to consider that justice or not, she was behind bars for a little while. The Crowleys, however, I think they were in Texas. They were never charged, never investigated. Nothing ever happened to them, period.
And they still maintain their innocence and no knowledge of any of it.
And I want to add one thing what the judge said. If you watch the film, and I was also at sentencing, I think it was 6 of the 7 days, so the 7th day, we were in federal court. When Nassar sent this letter, it was his attempt to take control of you, because he is a master manipulator. Not only is he a predator and a pedophile, but he's a sociopath, at least in my opinion. I mean, I think he may have signed some of the letters to you, Judge Larry Nassar and Lawrence Nassar.
Yes.
I think he's two different people. So he wanted to take control back. And Trinae, when she spoke, I remember I was sitting there vividly. This was the first time that I saw a reaction out of Nassar. The tears in his eyes. Something shook him about what she said.
Yes.
That was the only time during those 6-7 days that I saw a reaction out of it.
He wanted to take control of my courtroom every single day he tried. And I lashed out at him because you could feel the fury and the heat and the just sheer anger of those in my courtroom. And I wanted to keep it a safe place for everyone. So I'd lash out at him and things would just go from 10 back down to 0. And when Trinae spoke, it was the only time I felt, as Mick did, that there was a reaction. And of course she can speak to this, but I want to just say that her approach was so phenomenal. It was biblical, I think, because essentially she said to him, my friend, what have you done? That was gut-wrenching, not just for everybody in the courtroom, but you could see this visceral sort of, you could feel it. It got him inside. No one else did that. The rest of the time he spent saying, not my fault, shouldn't be here, etc.
I think the documentary did a good job of capturing that moment. I think that was a differentiator as you watched kind of the other stuff that was going on. Did you want to say anything, Trinae?
I mean,
yeah.
Like the judge said, I don't wish harm for anybody, and I went in not to have that conversation with anybody but he and I, but the world was watching, and I knew that he, at that moment, had gone dark. I saw it in his eyes. I saw him crying. I knew that he went on suicide watch for the weekend and that. I think that was probably my darkest moment in those next few days, because I thought if he was going to commit suicide somehow, that it was my fault. And that's not what my intention was when I went in. And, you know, I hope that there is a place for him that does get rehabilitation. I hope, and I like to stay in the side of hope because it's very easy to go to the dark.
Okay.
But truly, that impact statement, as much as it was written, it was also just coming out of my mouth. The things that I had to say to him were really just naturally what I needed to say to him.
I came across for sure. Let's open this up a little bit. The documentary makes a point about big money, NBC and the sponsorship, the Olympic coverage and the sponsors that go into Olympic coverage. I know, Mick, you're working on USA Gymnastics and the Olympic Committee case as well. What do you think? I mean, the documentary made at that point. What's your take on the influence of kind of bigger corporations, entities that just kind of perpetuate? I don't know if that's the right word. Process here.
That's a great word, and that's actually what the judge was alluding to, is that these brands, the Olympics, they put medals above the health and safety of their athletes. The Big Ten, Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan State, University of Michigan, they're putting their brand ahead of people. So big money has a lot to play. That's why you have to have accountability.
Yeah.
I think if the sponsors pulled out of the Olympics, if the sponsors who gave money to universities and hospitals, any place that systematically is not accountable and allows this to go unanswered and uneducated and make the meaningful changes, if those sponsors pulled out, money talks, there would be immediate change. We wouldn't even need legislation. But that hasn't happened. So what are we really saying? Let the lawsuits continue. We're going to continue our bad behavior. We're going to hide documents. We're not going to give people information. We're just going to allow it. We know what happens, and we really don't care because money that we make off of these things is more important. That has to stop. Never should we have money and medals prioritized over human life and safety.
And until they feel it, they won't make change. And that's the problem. Until an organization feels the pain, such a small amount of pain that all these survivors have gone through, they won't make change. They just don't have it in them.
Well, there's no consequence right now, correct?
Right.
But if you
To your
get,
point, Judge. Yeah.
if you get decertified, like the Gymnastics Association could get decertified, the Olympic Committee could be dismantled, change might come.
Right. We have a statement, I think more than a question, and I'll just kind of read verbatim, and Judge, it's about you. Judge Aquilina is known as a victim's advocate. Safety is found in her care. It is common for memories to come back in bits and pieces, not like watching a movie. This must be understood by law enforcement and the judicial system, so victims can feel a modicum of protection to speak the unspeakable. Justice Aquilina is a zone of understanding in horrific, pervasive criminal behavior. The attorney mentioned feeling safe with the female attorney and gravitating towards the females in practice. I have personally found that to be true. Although my lead attorney is male, thank you for this discussion. It is truly validating and what we need to protect the future generations. We have a few minutes left, maybe 5-ish or so, and wondering if you'd like to make any final comments about the documentary, any thoughts about the future. We talked about kind of how we fix the system, kind of in a sort of general way. But I want to give everybody an opportunity to make some final comments. Mick, can we start with you?
Yeah, I think as we started this discussion, change is slow, but change is happening. Have hope. Believe people, believe victims, they turn into survivors. If somebody seems off, lend an ear, because that's all they really need to begin with, is somebody who will listen to them. Don't judge, just listen. I truly believe change is coming, hopefully for our state, but in reality our whole country, but it does take time.
Judge?
I just want to echo what Mick just said, but listen, believe, take meaningful action, because knowing about something and taking no action does not count. You have to take action to apply what you've learned and have it be meaningful for change. And I just want to thank Cooley Law School for hosting this and for all of you for attending, because it is we're only going to have change if we continue this meaningful discussion. And by you being here means you're partnering for change, and you are the continuation of our voices and to demand justice, change, accountability. So thanks to all of you.
Couldn't agree more.
Trinae, thank you for being here, and thank you for your openness to talk about your particular situation. I know continually takes, I'm assuming a ton of courage just to kind of do these things. Anything you want to say as a closing remark?
Yeah, you know, like the other two said, believe the survivor, but also if you are on the side of hearing the disclosure, ask them what they want. Give them back their power by seeing what it is that they want to have happen instead of what you think they should do. Because that ultimately can really change the trajectory of their journey, and not realizing that they have the power and they have the answers to be able to do whatever it is that they need to do, but that you're there as a hand. And then also bystander intervention. I think that's something we don't talk about enough, because you hope you're not in that situation, but if you are in a situation and you see something that's not okay, or you hear something that's not okay, by standing up and calling that out, you are helping facilitate change, truly, even if it's just something you see at a restaurant or a bar or whatever, just becoming part of the change.
I just have to add this, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But Trinae mentioned bystander, and let me just say that it's okay to be wrong. I think everybody wants to be right. It's really okay to get it wrong, because when you are right, you save a life. If you're wrong, there are no legal consequences.
On that note, I'd like to thank Terry Corella here at the Law School, Audra Foster and Rick Lowe for putting this all together. Thank our guests, Mick Graywall from the Graywall Law Firm, Judge Rosemarie Aquilina, and of course, Ms. Trinea Gonczar for being here today. We'll see you next time at our next community conversation, which I believe is in a couple weeks. Take care, and have a great rest of the day.